Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Youth Talk. Artificial intelligence is transforming industries worldwide, but its rapid growth creates legal challenges, especially across borders. Understanding international AI laws is vital for addressing the risks that might come with it, and that's our topic for today. Like we always do, I'd like to start by welcoming our guest, Mr. Sidali Boutlis. He is a legal professional who will be answering all of our AI law questions today. Hello and welcome.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Nice to be here.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. So, as I said in the beginning, today we'll be discussing everything AI laws. Since it's a very new and very booming sector, it's important to understand the laws that come with it. I think we should start by talking about the key international treaties and agreements governing the AI development and usage worldwide.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So in order to understand and have a good idea of what AI looks like today, I think we should refer to Europe. Europe just recently came up with one of the most comprehensive and harmonized laws when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's known as the EU AI Act. And what they did is they took some years, actually. The first draft came out in 2020, later on 2022, and they put a comprehensive framework that touches on all of the different aspects of artificial intelligence and how it affects the regulatory landscape. From there, you will actually go and try to break it down and compare it with different jurisdictions like the United States, like China. So moving from the EU AI Act, we would then look at perhaps the presidential decree that was done by President Biden. What's important to understand that when it comes to an executive order in the United States, it's not binding law. So we're looking more at soft laws in the US.
I mean, it's not fine. We won't be going to jail if we break one of these laws, but it is an actual law.
Exactly. They're there to really direct public sectors and to create guidelines that they need to respect. And one thing that's important to consider when it comes to regulation is that AI is a race. And these nations are trying to beat each other to get to AI hegemony. And right now, the ones leading the race are China and the United States, which is why when you look at the regulatory landscape, you will find that their laws are a lot more lax than other places like Europe, Australia, the United Kingdom. And at the same time, we need to be mindful that it's very new. So legislation is usually slow, depending on the country. And they're having a hard time coping with the rapid change of
So would you say making the AI laws more strict can slow down the development of this sector in these certain countries?
Absolutely, because what happens is when you make strict AI laws, you're then hindering growth and you're discouraging investors. A very good example is with OpenAI. When the EU AI Act came out, so there are different tiers of categories of AI systems that they categorized. You have unacceptable risk, high risk, and moderate risk. Right. And they kind of set ChatGPT, which is an OpenAI product.
The one that we all use and know, so it's the most popular one,
Absolutely.
Right?
It's a very good example for our audience to relate to, is that they're using that high-risk framework and they categorize as high risk. What happens then is that it creates an additional cost for the provider to comply with this high-risk standard. So the stricter you make a law, the more expensive it becomes and the more hindering it becomes for the provider to comply with it. Right. Therefore, they're discouraged to come and invest in your jurisdiction, and they will go to a competing jurisdiction, for example, the US or China, and in that case, then you're kind of losing the race.
So like this, we have a good understanding of the race and why these countries are leading the AI sector. I think we should talk about something else, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, because when you talk about AI, you feed it a lot of data, whether you like it or not. That's how it works. You feed it data, and then you ask it the question. So when it comes to these General Data Protection Regulations, how would they impact the AI business by operating internationally? When you have people feeding the AI data from Africa, from Europe, how would you go about explaining that?
So I think we should tackle this from a two-faceted approach. Is first understand the impact of data protection laws when it comes to AI. So like you said very well, AI is data is oil to the AI engine.
Right.
And what happens there is that you need to be very careful as to what you're feeding your AI systems. The advantage here is that we have these data protection laws that came out as early as 2016, 2018, and a lot of organizations are already become adepts at managing it and at complying with them. So when you're looking at AI, all of the regulation stems from that because they need to be harmonized. You cannot have an AI law that contradicts your data protection law. So what you do is you first look at the data. You understand how you're compliant with that data. What is your source of your data, your data custodians? Where is it going? Are there any cross-border implications that we need to be mindful of?
Because when we first started using ChatGPT, it was exciting. Everyone wanted to try it. It's a new thing that we were all excited about, but we didn't quite ask, where is my data going? Where is this information that I'm telling this computer going? Who's going to use it? Who's going to be able to see it? I think nobody really asked the question until later on.
Exactly. And what happens is, to answer that question, your data is a little bit all over the place. It's in data centers that not a lot of people know where their geographic location is. We don't know who are third-party processors of this data. So I can tell you for a fact that many organizations outsource their data to India for processing. And if you actually read the fine print in your online contracts, which many people don't read, you always hit accept and agree, you'll see that they give you a clause that explains how your data is going to be processed and for how long before they actually have an obligation to delete it. And when you put all these things together, you find that it's hard to keep track of it as a consumer.
Right, so they're free from any responsibility, and we don't know where this data will be used or maybe who's going to be able to look at it.
That's not necessarily true. They're not free from any responsibility. And if you do if you look in the internet, you'll find that Google had to pay an astronomical amount when it comes to data compliance laws with GDPR.
Right.
And these fines can reach the millions of dollars. So there is potential for liability. There is law that tells you that you can be at risk and what you would do in order to be liable for this. The question is, how is it being enforced, by what entities, and who has that privilege of actually being protected by this?
I mean, yes, I think that's a very good point to talk about. I think we should also talk about the main challenges when these companies try to comply with both the laws that are implemented in the US and in the European Union. It's very different. Some can be very strict, some can be more forgiving. How would we go about making the difference between these two systems?
So you have to think about pros and cons in both countries. So right now, everybody wants to create some form of AI solution.
We all do, of course.
Exactly. Every time I have a conversation, I've had quite some very interesting conversation the past few weeks with people, and everybody has some form of idea that relates to their profession, their specialized knowledge, and they want to implement AI in that. And it's great because everybody's has adopted this technology. They see how great it is. People work with it. People study with it.
Right.
So it's powerful. There's no denying that. However, there are still many things we don't understand about it. So when it comes to finding these ecosystems, where do I want to go and start my solution? You have to think about two things. First of all, do I want to go to a country like the US and China and compete with these giants, right, that are OpenAI, Google, Amazon? I mean, maybe I don't have much of a shot. But
and there's a strategy that they do is when they see a promising AI company, they go and buy it and, just buy it and cut the technology right there, and you would have no chance of going into the market or maybe getting your chance in the big market. So it's no question.
And if you're resilient enough, you will get an offer by these giants to purchase your solution. So you won't be in the game for long, let's just put it that way.
You'll just make some good money.
Exactly, and hopefully have a nice retirement. But if you go and, for example, implement your solution somewhere like Hungary or other countries where, and we're not talking about these big countries in Europe, that's the advantage of the European Union, is that there are smaller countries where you can implement your solution and you can see it grow. But then you have to comply with these strict EU regulations, and it becomes even more complex in China. So I think there's a trade-off there. Ideally, for a young firm, it depends on the maturity and who we're advising here. If I'm advising a startup, I tell them go to where there's the least amount of restrictions and also the least amount of competition. Go to these emerging markets. Really, that's where you want to be.
That's actually pretty solid advice. I think I haven't heard it yet. Could we talk about the difference between the AI regulations in the European Union, US, and China? These are the big three players, and I think they have a pretty different system. I think the European Union one is stricter than the other two.
Absolutely, it's stricter and more comprehensive. So they have the advantage of having created the first piece of law that relates to AI. So if we're talking about the EU, you're really looking at three main laws. You start at the EU AI Act, which is the most comprehensive of all of them. And then you slowly kind of get into more detail depending on the need. So you have an AI liability directive to see if your AI product actually falls under, can create harm that makes you liable in a certain way. And we're talking about tortious civil harm here. So you need to establish a causal link between the duty of care that you as an AI system provider owe to your consumer and the damage that has occurred. And then you also look at the product liability directive, which also stems from that. We're not going to get into too much of the legal jargon.
Yeah, we're not going to give you free advice if you want to get a lawyer.
Right. So when you look at the US, on the other hand, so they're very robust in terms of frameworks. So NIST has established a very nice AI governance framework, how to essentially deploy safe AI. And that went in hand with President Biden's order, so executive order to bring out a law. Well, it's really not a law. So what it does fall at the federal level in the US. So it's important to understand that in the United States, you have federal and state laws. Federal laws govern what's national security, anything that touches on major issues. And then state laws touch on more subtle day-to-day things. We're talking about healthcare, you're talking about transportation, education.
Right.
That's
more
where
civilian things.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is the lack of harmony between these two entities who are able to create laws, is that it becomes very difficult to reconcile the two. So an executive order can come out and the state doesn't necessarily want to comply with it. And they don't really have to. Congress can also override it in some manners. So you become in this really, it's a complicated legal gymnastic. And that's what hinders the US's adoption of regulation when it comes to AI. At the same time, they're enjoying it right now because it keeps them competitive in the race, especially when you have Google, Amazon, and Meta and all these big giants in your jurisdiction. You want to give them the resources and the environment to grow quickly. Moving on to China, we're looking at more of a government restrictive policy. Right. So it starts with the Personal Information Protection Law, and it moves into the cybersecurity law. So the PIPL is essentially the GDPR. It's the same thing.
Their version of the GDPR.
It's their version of the GDPR, our version of the Law 1807. So they all say the same thing when you start looking at them in today's day and age. And goes into cybersecurity. Security is huge in China. When you have 1.4 billion of a population, you want to be very, very careful as to what data is traveling around. Right. And one of their biggest threats are campaigns of misinformation, which we have seen to be very dangerous in previous election years in the United States. So that's the risk that they have. And that was then shifted into what we call today the development plan for next generation AI. And this is probably the coolest piece of legislation that China came out with regards to AI. And what they did was they created zones. And these zones are directly linked to their municipalities. So you have Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and each municipality in China specializes in something. So if you're looking at Shanghai, it's economic prosperity. If you're looking at Shenzhen, they're really good at business. They have very high academic levels, PhD levels. Beijing is more industrial. So they allowed AI to specialize in these sectors. And what they do is they create a favorable environment if you're working in an AI technology that benefits that sector in that municipality. So they're kind of creating different zones to enable themselves to control it better. and to prompt innovation while keeping a firm grip on how they moderate AI
It's
technology.
not the first time that they use this dividing system to be able to control a lot of different zones. They've used it in other sectors, but using it in AI is very interesting. I think it could be implemented anywhere in the world. It's a very bright idea.
Absolutely, and I think it's more relevant for China because they are given the diversity
a huge population,
yes,
right?
and the diversity of cultures. I mean, if you historically go back to China, they were split into many kingdoms who
Right.
were always making wars to each other. And if you look at the languages spoken, although the national language is Mandarin. You will go to Shenzhen and they will speak Cantonese.
Right.
You will go to other places like Guangzhou and they speak Hakka. So there's already there's an inherent cross-cultural difference, and how do you unify all these different cultures?
Under one umbrella could be hard,
you need,
right?
and this is the importance of law. You need laws to be able to unify such a disparity in population ideology.
That's a very good quote, actually. So how would you say we could go about cross-border data transfer laws? It can really impact how the AI uses our data and maybe how we train it. Because if you go to Algeria, for example, we have certain information or maybe beliefs that we feed this AI, and maybe then you go to another country like Tunisia or Egypt, and they're feeding it a different information. How would we go about this cross-border data transfer to be able to reach its final stage?
So if we think about it practically, you want to think about whether you, in your jurisdiction, are an AI provider and an AI consumer. So if we take the example of China, for example, and we're going to contrast it with Algeria. So if we're looking at China, they are AI providers, and they have very strict laws about sending Chinese data cross-border.
Right.
And what they do then is that they limit the scope of what goes out. However, there's very little restriction as to what comes in to the AI provider who is regulated. What does that mean? That means that I don't want anything to come from the US, right? I don't want my population to be able to consume anything they see out there. So we kind of close it. We don't take, we don't. But when it comes to the data that we need for our AI systems, we'll send what we want. So if you take, for example, Huawei, Alibaba, they create a lot of AI solutions, and they're creating their versions of Claude, their versions of ChatGPT, etc.
I mean, even when you talk about social media, they have their own social media platforms. They don't really use the mainstream ones. So that's a very unique thing about China.
They block the mainstream
Right.
ones. So if you go to China, you need to have a VPN in order to be able to use Facebook or WhatsApp.
Right.
And that's what's really interesting, is that they're advanced. When you think about their WeChat app, Elon Musk has always tried to do the same thing. He calls it a super app, where you can do everything in there. You can do your banking, you can do your purchasing.
And everything is encrypted, so you're safe.
Exactly.
Right, that's amazing. I think we should also talk about the intellectual property, the IP, when it comes generated by these AI systems, because we do feed it all this information from different countries, from different perspectives about different cultures, and then this intelligence, or maybe that comes out of this AI, it could be very tricky to control or maybe put a law on. How would you say we can legalize that?
So with this question, you're shedding the light as to how inherently cross-disciplinary AI is. It's in everything. It's in healthcare, it's in intellectual property, it's in cross-jurisdiction, it's in data protection. So when you're looking at these laws, you need to first start looking at the law itself, all of your national intellectual property laws. And then you need to start seeing how does AI fit into that. So you're going to have to revise all these laws, and you're going to have to see how you can amend them to be agile and to adapt to today's day and age. And legislation is usually very slow at that. Another alternative would be to create new laws that specifically talk about AI.
It would take a lot of time to get approved and passed around, yes.
Exactly. So when it comes to intellectual property, there's very few case law out there. But I would like to, again, and I feel like I'm talking a lot about China today, but I feel like their ecosystem is very interesting because, first of all, when it comes to AI, they've been releasing the most academic articles, and they're taking an approach that's different from the rest of the world. They're really trying to innovate in this realm. They're trying to, like you say, catch the bull by the horns. So there's a very interesting case between a law firm in China, in Beijing, and another tech company, Baidu. And what happened was that that law firm published a legal article. Baidu went ahead and stole that, published it. The legal article created images that were created by AI, some text that was created by AI. And Baidu said, well, you know, we really didn't steal their intellectual property. They have no copyright into it because
the AI made it, right?
AI made it. And one distinguishing aspect of copyright is that it needs to be original work. If AI created it, how can I associate original work to a natural person?
Right, it's not a real person, so it could be very tricky to. I can't wait to see how that one turns out. Now, if we speak about the harm that could come from AI, or maybe the decisions that can lead to AI being or causing damage to a firm or maybe a person, or how could we talk about the liability? Where does it go? Is it the company that provides the AI? Is it the consumer's fault? How would you go about that?
So you need to establish the burden of proof. So who has to prove that? Does the manufacturer have to prove that they're innocent, or does the consumer have to prove that they've been harmed?
Right.
Right. So it really starts there. And depending on what laws you're looking at, what jurisdictions, that burden of proof may change. The other thing to see is how easy is it to establish fault? Because one characteristic of AI systems is that they are very opaque. Very little transparency in how it works, and people may want to look up the issue of black box AI, LLM hallucinations. We really don't know what's going on in there, especially when you're not a provider.
So you can't really put your finger on one person whose fault it is, maybe the damage that could come from AI.
As a consumer like yourself and myself, it's going to cost us a lot of money and a lot of time.
It will.
Nobody will bother. Now, when it comes to bigger organizations, they will put in the effort, they will put in the resources, but then that puts a stress on the judicial system. Courts are now found themselves dealing with these very expensive litigations that are costly and take a long time.
With no clear laws or how to solve it, or
exactly,
it could be very tricky.
So you can have the same case, and you can have two courts in the same jurisdiction judge it differently.
Exactly. Speaking of courts and international rights, when we talk about international human rights, how do they apply to the AI system? Since you talked about how maybe AI can have its own intellectual rights, but it's not an actual person. So how could we maybe use the international human rights law to implicate it on this AI systems to control maybe the scarce, when we're scared for our privacy or maybe our freedom of expression? How would we use these laws when it comes to AI?
You would do it just like you do with any other laws that are involved with AI. Since AI is everywhere, you first look at the law itself. So we talked about intellectual property, we talked about data protection, and now we're talking about human rights laws. Right. So these laws are very clear as to what creates a breach of human rights. And if you're able to show that the AI system has conducted and has breached that right, then there you have a case. Another important thing to note is that a lot of AI providers and AI regulation are trying to create the concept of trustworthy AI. Now, people or academics are having trouble defining.
You can't even trust people, so how would you trust an AI?
Exactly, are trying to define this trustworthy AI. It's very difficult. So you need to create a framework, and these laws are created with human rights in mind. And therefore, when you're thinking about the European Convention for Human Rights or your local human rights laws and creating this legislation, you're ticking some boxes, not all of them. And wherever there's gaps to fill out, then you would want to go back to the human rights laws and try to create a link, and that's what lawyers are for.
That's amazing. That's what lawyers are for. Thank you so much, Sidali, for all the information that you have shared with us today when it comes to AI regulation laws. Now, what we do at the end of each episode is we ask our guests to give maybe some advice to the youth watching us who maybe want to do what you're doing right now and pursue a career in law or international law. What would you say? Maybe some advice that you would have loved to hear?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'd really like to tell you first start with AI. It's probably much cheaper to launch a solution with an LLM than to go and pursue legal education. However, take an idea, implement it, and follow your gut to the end. Any small thing will become big with sufficient dedication and effort. So whether it's AI, whether it's law, whether it's mathematics, you will be fine as long as you stick to your resolve and you follow your gut.
That's an amazing piece of advice, actually. And maybe some of them are worried that they started their studies here in Algeria and they wouldn't be able to compete with the foreign students who maybe received an education abroad all of their lives. What would you say to that?
Well, I'll tell them, you know, when they invented the cell phone, a lot of countries did not have landlines and they skipped directly to the cell phone. So now that you have access to internet, now that you have access to AI, you are on par with everybody else. Education now is being done online. People are not as clever as they used to be, believe me. They're using ChatGPT for everything, and that really just hinders their growth. The interactions that I've had here in Algeria are brilliant. People here are gems, and they can do anything the other nations can do, if not better.
And for someone who started from Algeria and had a career abroad, what would you say to someone who's just going to get into the job market directly and not study?
So I think that this is the perfect time to do it, because nowadays you can gain access to knowledge from a decentralized source.
Right.
You don't have to go to university. You don't have to go to school. As a matter of fact,
But you should.
most of the entrepreneurs in the US did not go to college or dropped out from college. So it's not a must. And when we see today's education system, we want to be very careful. There's too many choices out there. And just like the internet. So how about you pick something you really like, you're committed to, and put in the work.
Start from there.
You have to put in the work.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching. Our guest today was Mr. Sidali Boutlis. He is a legal professional who gave us all the necessary information about the AI laws. See you in another episode.